Hello and welcome back to TV on TV here on Brookline Interactive Group. I'm your host, Tommy Vitolo, and it's great to be back. In the past few months while the show was on hiatus, I won a couple of elections, traveled to Africa and Europe, filed a bunch of bills at the beginning of this session. Very busy, but this show is not about me. In fact, this week, we're interviewing Town Administrator Carey, who's been on the job for about 6 months and is doing remarkable work. That interview was recorded about a week ago, and so it's still very fresh. Stay tuned. Really interesting conversation, again, with our Town Administrator Carey. But first, as always, the news. After significant public pressure, pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly has announced that it will cut the price of insulin by 70% to make the drug easier for patients to afford. Mayor Lightfoot of Chicago lost her bid for re-election with 2 other candidates, continuing to a runoff campaign in April. Lightfoot was the first Black woman and openly gay person to be elected mayor of the city of Chicago. The Supreme Court heard more than 3 hours of oral arguments on the constitutionality of President Biden's student debt forgiveness plan, with several conservative justices questioning whether the administration has the authority to forgive student debt. The FAA is investigating an incident where a Learjet flight took off without clearance as a JetBlue flight was preparing to land. Fortunately, it was not a collision. Yesterday, Massachusetts Governor Healey announced her free community college plan, Mass Reconnect, as well as her first full budget, which the legislature will debate and ultimately pass some version of later this year. Also yesterday, the Massachusetts House of Representatives voted on a $585 million supplemental budget that included funding for the emergency shelter system, nutritional assistance, universal school meals, and early education and care workforce stabilization grants. Former State Representative Ed Coppinger started a new role at Mass Bio yesterday. His former district includes West Roxbury, part of Jamaica Plain, and Precinct 16 in Brookline. The special election primary will be held on May 2nd, the same day as Brookline's town election. This May, in that town election, Brookline will vote on whether or not to rebuild the Pierce School, a school that was poorly designed for learning and is not up to code, not accessible, and in some places unsafe for our students. If you want to see what Pierce looks like from the inside, there will be tours this Sunday, March 5th at 11 a.m. and 1:30 p.m., departing from the VFW at the corner of Washington Street and Cypress Street. That's all the news for today. We're going to cut over in just a minute to my interview filmed about a week ago with Town Administrator Carey. So stay tuned right here on Brookline Interactive Group. And we're back. And as advertised earlier, we're here with Brookline Town Administrator Carey. Chaz, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Representative Vitolo. Nice to be here.
Please call me Tommy. We don't have time for all of that. And I'm going to call you Chaz. Forgive me.
That's absolutely fine.
We want to get right into it. You've been at the helm for a while, but because of the winter, because of COVID, because of lots of reasons, a lot of folks haven't gotten a chance to know you at all yet. So tell us what you were doing for the first part of your life before you got to Brookline. What's your background? Where are you coming from?
Well, thanks for that. And I hope to meet the folks that I haven't had a chance to meet yet in this first kind of 6-month period. So by all means, drop by Town Hall. I'm looking forward to meeting folks. But let's see, I have spent most of my career in the public sector. I went to law school down at Georgetown and college in New York City. So I moved back to New York City, worked as a lawyer for many years for the New York City Law Department doing some litigation. I clerked and then I went to private practice. I spent 18 months in private practice and I couldn't hack it. Let me tell you, defending cases about who's responsible for a microwave malfunctioning at 4 a.m. It wasn't for me. So I took a job, a more stressful job, working on hurricane recovery for New York City, the Mayor's Office of Housing Recovery Operations. I started there as deputy general counsel, and over the years they kept on kicking me up the ladder until by the end of my time there, I was running the place. It had also branched out from there into COVID-related work. So we were doing a lot of work for people who were isolating at home, making sure they were connected to the resources they needed to be connected to. And then Hurricane Ida hit the city. So I was doing 3 different disasters at 3 different times. And working with the New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation on their COVID-related backlog. So a lot of New York City work, a lot of disaster recovery and disaster management operations in that regard. And then when my wife took a job as a senior lecturer at Harvard Business School, we came up here. And it was, I grew up here. I actually grew up in Concord. So it was a homecoming for me. And I said to her, how long do you think it will take me before I go back into public service? And she said, I give you a year. And it took me 6 months. So I was consulting for a little bit. And then this job opened up and it was an incredible opportunity. I kind of threw my hat in the ring and said, you know what, this is the kind of work I love doing, working with a community that is as engaged as Brookline and has so many interesting choices to make as Brookline about what the future is going to look like. And so I've been just constantly rewarded every day I've been here. I'm really, really grateful to be a part of this community and to work with you and everyone watching and everyone who's part of the town to try and figure out how best to proceed when we have a lot of open questions in front of us.
So our viewers are dying to know, 2-part question. Number 1, did you get like custom foul weather gear as part of emergency management? Number 2, did you get to keep it?
1, no, because by the time I had gotten there, they were already, 5 years into the process and all the cool hard hats and gear had been given out. So I had to borrow other people's gear. So 2, no, I never got to keep it. I was always, the guy like running around looking for one of those cool raincoats or a hard hat or something, but they never gave me my own, sorry to say.
Well, I've got orange jackets. If you ever need to borrow one, I've got a few spares. So you got here in the fall of last year, and we are sort of limping along through COVID, coming into the 3rd winter and not knowing what that was going to be like. Walk us through what onboarding has been like during COVID and during, some challenging times.
Well, I'm just incredibly grateful for 3 things. 1, the previous town administrator, Mel Kleckner, was just such an incredible resource. He had been here for so long, and he really left big shoes to fill. I mean, literally as well as figuratively. Mel was a big, tall guy, but also, he really developed an incredible institution while he was here. And that's reflected in the 2nd group of people that I'm very grateful to have with me, which is the department heads. There are some really fantastic people that work at the top of Brookline municipal government, and that trickles down to the staff around them. They surround themselves with good people. People are engaged and excited to work with them and come in every day. So really from the top down, Mel created a really robust organization with some really great people involved. So it's been a pleasure to come in and work with them because they were able to, their work was already proceeding at such a good pace, and it wasn't too hard for them to teach me about what they were doing and what their priorities were. And then the 3rd group, obviously, is the select board. I'm the chief operating / administrative officer of the town. The select board is the executive, right? They set the agenda. And I think what this select board has done, right when I got in, when Mel was still here, they held a summit out at the Putterheim Golf Course and sat down and said, we really need to be more deliberate about what our long-term goals are. What do we need? What do we want to prioritize? And how should we instruct the town administrator to carry out that agenda? And so I've been very grateful for that guidance because that has given me a framework to help work towards what the town's goals are. So I've been very, very fortunate to have those 3 groups around. Excellent team up here on the 6th floor, who, now filled out, Melissa Goff has been promoted. Devin Fields has been promoted. Our new ATA for finance, Charlie Young, is just an excellent add, as well as our new finance director, Lincoln Heineman, all the department heads, all the municipal staff, and of course, the select board team. So it's just been, I'm really fortunate to be where I am.
So I'll frame out the next few months. I know you're very busy. We're only going to talk for 25 minutes and I'll let you get back to work. Look, coming up, we have an election, which includes not just town meeting and select board and library, but possibly ballot questions on 3 separate topics: Pierce, operating override, and cannabis. The select board hasn't necessarily decided everything for all of them, so I won't put you on the hook for all the details. we've got town meeting. In between now and then, you've got to make a budget work for scenarios that may or may not play out. You're pretty busy. Tell us two things. Number one, like what's coming up, and also, I think importantly for the viewers, where is their opportunity to help engage and shape our future around these issues?
Those are great questions. So coming up in the immediate term, you're right. Under law, I have to present the town's financial plan as soon as possible after the governor officially releases her budget. We have a new governor, so she's likely to release her budget on the 1st, which means our financial plan will come out on the 7th, March 7th. But even before that happens, we're using some of the preliminary information we have to build out the budget for the town side of operations. And that, as a practical matter over the next several months, means a lot of hearings in front of the advisory committee, which is a subset of town meeting. And again, they're very engaged. We're just a great group of people to work with because they're very concerned about the town's fiscal longevity and stability. And they really help us as staff think through how to best implement those priorities. So I would, in the immediate term, thinking about the budget, thinking about the needs on that front, I would strongly encourage folks to, if they're interested, watch some of those meetings. They can be a little technical, but also the select board has an opportunity over the next several months. You'll see it in the select board meetings for reviews of budget at a relatively higher level, but that allow some back and forth between the select board members and department heads about what people's priorities are, where the limitations of funding are. I would definitely encourage folks to get involved there. The select board has the opportunity for public comment at the beginning of every session. It's 3 minutes, and you can speak on matters that matter to you. So I'd strongly encourage folks, if you are thinking about talking about how to prioritize the budget, that's a really great way to get involved, is to speak directly to the select board at public comment or send them an email. I know they read all the emails they receive. So in the immediate term, right, talking about the budget, as I said a couple of weeks ago, we are looking currently, because of COVID, because of inflation, because of a number of pressures, at a budget that, absent an operating override, would need to go in for reductions. We are looking at a structural deficit of, I would say, around $700,000, a little more. And that number has gone up and down. Early on in this process, it was a little higher. Thankfully, it's starting to come down a little bit, but unfortunately, it's looking like the governor's budget is also a more cautious budget than what we had been hoping for Brookline. And so we are trying our best to figure out, if there is no override, how to pare down expenses without cutting jobs or vital services. And so that's kind of the big dance that's happening now in our office. We're also looking at, based on the select board's priorities, what an operating override would contain. In the past, historically, operating overrides have been very focused on the schools. And there's a reason for that. Brookline really cares about its schools. It's a big draw of why people want to live here and what's so attractive about it. And what I always say to the superintendent is, I don't view the school-town relationship as a zero-sum game. I think the town benefits from a strong school department, but I also think the town needs to be on equal footing with the schools when talking about where their priorities are and how they can be financed if we are fortunate enough to receive the assistance of additional funding from the community in the form of an operating override. So this time around, in 2018, the town's portion of the override was less than $1 million. The current proposition is the town's portion of the override is $5 million, just under $5 million. That may change. It's likely to go down, not up, as we identify additional savings. But that is designed to meet the agenda set by the select board, which is, transportation, social equity, talking about ensuring that town employees are paid competitively so that we have good, we have strong staff going forward. Additional funding for the senior center, additional funding for COVID-related cuts that have had to be made to our municipal fleet. All of those, big ticket things that ordinarily there's not enough money in the budget to think of seriously, this is the opportunity based on the select board's vision for a more visionary sort of restructuring of what town government can provide. So it's exciting to hear the select board's priorities and try and make that happen. And that's going to be part of the dialogue over the next month before the ballot questions are set, is what precisely in that around that $5 million is going to be put on the ballot for the voters.
And this is in concert with the Pierce debt exclusion. And of course, you and I know debt exclusions and overrides are slightly different, but from the perspective of most voters, they add up to about the same thing, which is a tax increase on their property taxes. Give us just a little bit of flavor on Pierce.
Sure. So the Pierce debt exclusion, right? It is a temporary increase in property tax to cover the cost of bonds for a large scale project. But for a project like Pierce, that we're talking about a time horizon of 25 years, 30 years. So it is for a lot of people, for practically speaking, a more at least a very long term property tax increase. And on the school side, right, the process has been the Pierce School, which is here, right next door to Town Hall, has the historic building and has the building that was built in the, I believe, the 1960s. And there's been concern on the school side that building has outlived its, I would say, its pedagogical use, right? It's a totally open floor plan. It's a concrete brutalist structure. It costs a lot of money to maintain. The educational feedback is not as good because of the concerns about they're using room dividers instead of actual walls. The sound carries. ADA accessibility is obviously a concern for folks who are disabled. And so the thought there is that the building would be next on the list of schools that have been renovated. Previously, for example, the Driscoll School and the high school were subject to major renovation projects that are now in their concluding phases. And so Pierce is kind of next on the list. So that project is large. We are fortunate to have funding from the state that defrays some of the cost of that. But it is still a pretty substantial number that will appear on the ballot. I think it's important for people to understand that if that's a priority for them, if that's something they want to vote for, that number is parceled out over the course of 25 years. And yes, you are paying interest on the bonds, but because we are a AAA rated community, we are able to issue bonds and pay a relatively low interest rate. Now, relatively low interest rate in this world of inflation is still tough, but it's much more manageable than some other communities. So those are the kinds of things that I think people balance when they think about, am I going to vote for this or not? These are here are the the town and school priorities on the table. And the thought is, for things this large, it really is a question for the community. Does the community want to finance this? And if so, is this the right structure for it? And so those are the questions that will be on the ballot to answer this May.
And I would just add editorially, the state support is not permanent or guaranteed in the future. It's for now. And if the town votes no, those tens of millions of dollars won't be around if we decide to do Pierce 5 years from now. There's no reason to think that they will. So I, throw that in the mix. Town meeting, of course, we've got to get to our May 2nd elections. And then we've got town meeting coming up in addition to the budget, which of course is worth at least one, if not two nights of deliberation. Any other big items that we think are coming up in this May?
So far, we here on the 6th floor really do our best to try and track warrant articles as they come in, and as people kind of bring them to us to talk through what's doable and what might make more sense. And by the way, we strongly encourage that. We strongly encourage people to say, if you say, I have an idea, I really strongly encourage you to reach out to staff early in the process. Don't reach out, the day before the warrant closes, but which is March 9th, by the way, at 1 p.m. So it's very specific. After 101.
You sure it's not noon?
I believe it's 1 p.m., but I'll double check.
I'm under, it might be noon. So just when in doubt, assume it's noon.
Right.
If you have an extra hour, that's okay. But
for the sake of your sanity, come at noon. I will be here. I won't take lunch that day. I'll take your papers. we encourage folks to come in with the ideas to think about how best they can be translated into a warrant article. You know, for example, someone coming in and saying, oh, I think there should be a department that does X. It may be worthwhile to talk to our departments to see, do we already do that? Are we already thinking about that? Is there a process already in place for that town meeting members could support, whether that's through a resolution saying we think it's important to do this, or whether it might be, you know, a way of saying, you know, similar to how we address with things like language access, saying like, this is a priority of the community wants this to happen. It should happen along the timeline that makes sense for municipal government, but it is a priority of ours. Those are the kinds of, you know, developments that really make town meeting work. And where town meeting, I think, can get more dysfunctional is particularly in this town meeting where there's the budget on the table. You know, the whole point of having the advisory committee, and the advisory committee, which is, again, a big subset of town meeting, being the primary driver of the budget that is ultimately presented to town meeting, is to have the community's assurances that this budget has been picked over, it has been thought through, and that there are no extraneous matters in there, that it reflects the community's priorities in a way that will pass town meeting. You know, in this kind of modern era, sometimes there's this drive to say, well, you know, you could find more money for this somewhere, right? But when people submit warrant articles that change the budget without a comparable budget offset, it really makes matters quite difficult for staff. So one of the, you know, again, going back to what you said earlier, Tommy, when we are going through this budget process now is really the time to make your voices heard on that. Now is the time to bring it up with staff and try and figure out what we're already doing and whether we can be doing more if that's the priority of the community, because we hear that and we respond to that. But a late breaking amendment in town meeting that breaks the budget means that our hands are often tied at the end of the year. Even if we're lucky to have more money come in than we budgeted, than we initially estimated for. Oftentimes where that money goes to is things like collective bargaining or, you know, stable or affordable housing stabilization. If we don't have that money because we have to put it to something that we weren't intending to put it towards, it means that those priorities are underfunded. And that's not something where, particularly in this era where I think people are saying across the board that they want to support municipal staff and pay them a living wage, that we don't want to be put in that situation. So I just strongly encourage folks, now is the time to start thinking about your budget priorities. And in May with the warrant articles, that's the time to start thinking about programmatic priorities.
So we talked about the near term. I want to talk about the long term. You're going to be here for a while. I'm going to be here for a while. The town is going to be here for a great long while. Where is Brookline headed in 2030, 2040, 2050? You know, big, broad strokes. And then, you know, we'll start thinking about how we get there. But where do we want to be?
I mean, one of the things, many things that attracted me about this job was that Brookline is a national leader on climate. You know, Brookline was one of the first communities to really say, we are going to take fossil fuel free development seriously. We are going to move beyond what the state asks. We're going to move beyond what the federal government asks. We are going to turn, you know, what seems like a vague pledge of, okay, we'll be fossil fuel free by 2040 into concrete action, concrete steps. And when the state put the brakes on that, Brookline worked collaboratively. I believe you sponsored that bill, right, to make sure that the state was dragged along with that. And now Brookline, again, in adopting the specialized energy code and being on the list of being on the list for the possibility of being one of the 10 communities in Massachusetts that is allowed to go even further and totally eliminate fossil fuels from future construction. It's very exciting to think about how the promise of getting to a carbon-free and an emissions-free future actually translates into reality. So the concrete steps we have to take towards that are the development of regulations and the implementation of them. And that's some of the big stuff that you see in our the town's package that it submitted to the American Rescue Plan Act committee this time around. The town is asking for just under $5 million from that committee in one-time funds. And the big things there are things like ensuring that everyone in town, not just people who can afford it or, have access to it, have access to the kind of, basic services to talk about how to reduce their carbon footprint, whether they own, whether they rent, whether they, currently drive a fossil fuel car, whether they haven't even considered buying something that doesn't run on diesel or gas. Being able to have that kind of stuff while also internally in the town, electrifying everything, turning our buildings into COVID-ready structures that can be fully electrified, electrifying our fleet. And that doesn't just mean small vehicles. We're looking at some of the larger vehicles too. Reducing emissions is crucial to the overall community health. And so we are taking those concrete steps now to think about what Brookline looks like 2030, 2040, 2050 from a climate perspective. There's also, I'm sorry to go on, but I think this kind of feeds in, we're looking at the livability of Brookline, the sustainable growth of Brookline. One of the things that people, I think say, understandably, when they look at the possibility of an operating override is they say, well, Brookline already has pretty high taxes. Why is it that Brookline is continuing to ask people to pay more in tax? And the answer to that is complicated, but it often has to deal with the fact that communities that have a more diverse tax base, that have more commercial growth, that have, for example, some communities have really thrived in the last 5 years on the growth of lab space. I don't think that's a bet for the long term. I think that's something that we have to think about moderately rather than jumping full bore into. But it's a component of something about broader sustainable growth. And so thinking about how Brookline as a community can grow, can continue to add new residents at a sustainable pace, not a build at all costs pace, while diversifying that tax base so that we are less reliant on operating overrides going forward, is a real interesting question. And it's one that requires a whole of government approach. I'm grateful, again, the select board is very interested in this question and is really taking the time to puzzle through with the community how best to solve that. One component of that is this question of how do we comply with the MBTA Communities Act, which requires us to have a certain area of town zoned for multifamily as of right. As of right is a very scary phrase because people hear that and they think, oh no, big condo towers have to go up everywhere. We are trying to think, meaning town staff, based on the select board's guidance, is trying to think of ways to do that in a smart and sustainable way, not just throwing open the doors and saying, go ahead, build wherever you want, but thinking about areas that have the capacity for growth, but can support that growth in a way that still maintains community character. And so we're very excited over the next several months to have this discussion with the community about the possibility of rezoning parts of Harvard Street, which is already a major commercial corridor that has, 4-story and in a couple of cases, slightly higher than 4-story housing or mixed use development. Thinking about how that space might be redeveloped in a way that maintains that 4-story character, that kind of low slung brownstone character, while also maintaining the commercial vibrancy and ensuring the things you see there now, like vacant storefronts and reduced hours, can go away with increased foot traffic. So thinking about how to do that creatively is going to take up a lot of our time and energy going forward, but we need community input to do that. And so I'm very excited to see that the planning department is already planning on scheduling regular office hours to discuss this. They're going to have a big kickoff meeting in March before they go before the select board on the 21st to talk about progress so far and the timeline for the rest of the work. So this is going to be a real whole of government activity, and I'm really looking forward to the community being engaged with that.
Unfortunately, we're out of town here on Brookline Interactive Group. Chaz, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend some time with us. I know there's a lot going on. We talked about the near future. We talked about most recently the MBTA Communities Act, and the just after near future, it'll be ongoing. And then we also talked about the long term. Thank you so much for all of your service during the week, nights and weekends, home and abroad, to help keep our town a wonderful place to live. Folks, you've been watching Brookline Interactive Group's TV on TV. I'm Tommy Vitolo, and we'll see you next week.